today we'll be talking about Vice, a 2018 Christmas release written and directed by Adam McKay and produced by Plan B Entertainment, Gary Sanchez Productions, and Annapurna Pictures. Now, this is the story of Dick Cheney, an unassuming bureaucratic Washington insider who quietly wielded immense power as vice president to George W. Bush, reshaping the country and the globe in ways that we still feel today. Now, what was your take on this movie?
It was a terrifyingly captivating rage bait film I've ever seen. And I've seen some Michael Moore films.
I kind of get what you mean there, because my own take was that if we're on a scale from awful to great and then some kind of mess stuff in the middle, I would say it was pretty good. It was a little bit better than meh, but it definitely has its own problems. Most notably, as a lot of reviews have mentioned, it had major tone issues.
Yeah, no, they kept going all over well, they didn't go all over the place with the tone.
I know what you mean, though. It really bounces between a couple of different tones. I feel like the major tones that bounce between were this very slapsticky style where you'd have like these kind of Monty Python-esque things that would happen in there.
Right.
And then it would go to these very dark, scenes of torture, of murder, of war, of reminding you that this is a thing that happened.
Right.
And then it would have the tone of the rest of the movie, which is sort of this dark comedy. But first, I would like to talk about the tone issues with the movie and kind of nail down what I mean by that.
Please.
So there is a particular scene in the movie which is a favorite of a lot of people, myself included, which is the restaurant scene. You know the one, right?
Yep, I remember that one.
You mind just going over what happened in it, just to give a recap for people who might not know?
Yeah, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and a few others were sitting at this restaurant. This waiter, who would normally be advertising food, is advertising all kinds of horrible policies and plans in place.
That's right. They particularly talk about using offshores for torture locations. They talk about impeachment of power from the president, and so on. It's this very Monty Python-esque skit that they go into. But the thing is, the skit, while it is pretty funny on its own, is very silly. And then in the middle of the skit, it cuts away to a montage of people being tortured, like the guy in the box, the guy with the dog collar on, this actual footage of real torture that was shown in Michael Moore documentaries.
Right.
But the weird part is, it cuts right back to the silly-ass restaurant scene after that, which is a perfect example of the very discordant tone that happened in this movie. And my opinion on this is that this happens because of a lack of faith in the audience from the director and writer.
Right. Some kind of pandering to kind of make it a little more lighthearted, or...
I'd actually say the opposite. I'd say that this is an issue where he believed that the audience would like Dick Cheney too much, where they would forget that he was a person who caused a lot of war crimes, potentially, and did a lot of terrible things. So he felt like he had to, at some point, say, oh, by the way, this guy did bad things. Remember the bad things he did. Okay, back to the movie. Which is ultimately where this very discordant tone comes from, if you ask me.
That's a good point. It kind of begs the question, why even bother with the humor attempt at all, then? I mean...
Well, that depends on the director's goal. If the director's goal was to make this hard-hitting documentary on Dick Cheney and his actions, then like 90% of the movie does not work, straight up.
Right. Because like you said, the tone just keeps transitioning to either a serious tone, dark tone, going back to the montage, and then some weird light humor tone.
Yeah, very slapsticky in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just to shift gears for a second, too, and I'm going to start getting into spoilers here as well, because at this point, you know the major criticism of the movie, and we can get into some more spoilery stuff and some certain scenes that we like in particular. What was your take on what made this movie not great?
What made it not great was I actually didn't see any problems with the movie, in all honesty. I thought like I said, it was a rage bait film, and it struck me in more emotional ranges than it did in I couldn't approach that film in a observational way.
Okay. So you did take this more as the documentary of like the rage bait Michael Moore style documentary, where it is meant to be just an enraging film to remind you of who Dick Cheney was.
Right. I did approach it like a documentary, but it wasn't really a documentary. What would you call it? A reenactment?
I call it a biopic.
A biopic. That's a good word for it.
Yeah, I think this was definitely a biopic, and there are liberties they take with it, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Such as, and again, spoilers. We're getting into spoilers now. With the narrator of the film, the young man who got hit by the car and donated his heart. Since obviously nothing is known about him aside from he died, but he's used as a narrator for the film for a lot of it.
And I thought that now that you mention it, that it did bother me about the movie, because I think that hampers the movie's credibility on how true this actually is. You know, I mean, we expected a little more of a living, credible source instead of a dead guy. I think.
I see where you're getting at, but I feel like there were enough signs that this was supposed to be like a very dark comedy, a take on the presidency, where we're supposed to laugh at just how grim it was that it happened. And there were enough signs early on, like the restaurant scene, like some of the flash forwards that would happen every so often, and like the fake credits thing. Somewhere around the middle of the movie, right before the actual vice presidency stuff begins. Yeah, I think that there's enough evidence of that early on that he wanted to make kind of this slapsticky film where it's much more of a buddy comedy between horrible people than anything else, between Rumsfeld and Cheney.
Rumsfeld and Cheney, yeah, the original Laurel and Hardy. Although, so do you think his purpose was to entertain, or was the purpose to...
That's the part I'm so confused about with this movie, because he seems to go into it with the purpose to entertain, but occasionally the director seems to wake up like from a nightmare, horror, sweat pouring down his back in the middle of the night,
right,
and think, I've made the perfect movie. Everyone's going to love Dick Cheney. I can't let this happen. And then it'll cut straight to a very grim, dark, Michael Moore-style shockumentary where it'll say, torture, death, war, famine. All right, back to the movie.
And then it'll pan, it'll then pan to him and being a loving father to his kids and wife, and like, it's just such a weird contrast, like how we have this man who has this notoriety, and then he's painted in such a loving, if not nurturing, portrait. I just think, I don't know. Should I hate him, or should I not empathize? What's the word I'm looking for?
I think you're looking for empathize.
Empathize. Okay.
Because a lot of the movie, and the final thing Dick Cheney says to the audience is that he's not sorry, he would do it again to protect us from our enemies, and that what he did was necessary. Right. And ultimately, what Dick Cheney, the character, is looking for from the audience is empathy, understanding of what he is. Not acceptance of him, but understanding of him. Right.
No, this was by no means a redemption film for Dick Cheney. It was more of just a means of understanding him, and I don't know. So would the audience have preferred straight up dark style movie without the humor, or would they like?
That's a tough question, and I think that if we want to talk about improvements that could be made to the movie, I actually want to put that on hold for just a second, and
sure,
instead let's go a little bit more lighthearted. What would you say was your favorite scene in the movie? Or the most effective. It doesn't have to be like silly fun. It can be just the most effective moment of the movie.
I think just Cheney's tenure as with Richard Nixon. That kind of fascinated me because he built all these relationships and all these associates throughout his entire tenure. How he just kind of built this ambition of shooting for the top, of achieving power, and he just never stopped. He just kept. I mean. I feel like that... So
what you're saying is your favorite scene was the entire movie.
Yes.
All right, but I'm going to go with my favorite scene then, and then we'll get back to you then. Yeah. My favorite scene is probably when Dick and Lynn are sitting on the couch listening to Dick Cheney's resignation speech. And what you have during that moment is you have Lynn, who is talking about what a tragedy it is that the president is stepping down, how it's a tragedy that he got caught and that he's being held accountable. Not that he committed a crime, but that he got caught. And Dick Cheney, meanwhile, played by Christian Bale, by the way, excellent performance, he's grinning to himself, chuckling, and he's talking about what a fool Nixon was for getting caught. Neither of them are ignoring that crimes happened, but both of them are talking about are showing off their own character in different ways of how they respond to the resignation and impeachment of Nixon, which I thought was a fantastic scene for the dark comedy, because that shows us how terrible of people they both are, while still keeping them kind of empathetic and making them kind of funny. Because, as we all know, the impeachment of Nixon was a great day for America, but this is the worst day in the world for the Cheneys.
Humor through realism, yeah.
Just classic dark comedy.
Yeah.
But okay, back to the question of your favorite scene. What would you say is your favorite scene? Not the whole movie.
Okay. Where they describe the climb to power through the teacups and saucers. That particular part interested me because...
yeah, that was near the end, right?
It was, I think the first third of the movie they talked about it, and then they kind of touch up on it toward the end.
Okay. You mind describing the scene that was in? Because just a refresher.
So based on my recollection, they described the ascension of power as the stacking of saucers and teacups. You could keep going, but until a point, your tower of saucers and teacups are going to fall. And, as Cheney goes along, his tower of saucers and teacups continues to go up, but toward the end of the movie, it starts to lean and ultimately fall.
Yeah, that's during the climax with the heart, right?
Right.
Speaking of the heart, let's talk about during that scene. That is when they show a montage of him kind of betraying his youngest daughter, Mary, the lesbian.
Right.
Let's talk about her role in the movie as well, and what you think about her role. Was she important? Was she not?
I think she was. She helped better portray Cheney's loving and nurturing side, specifically toward his family. For a man of his caliber and his standing to be that accepting of someone in his family who's gay, that's remarkable, really.
Especially for the time when she came out, which would have been around the late 80s, early 90s.
Right, where there was still plenty of scrutiny.
Exactly. But for me, I feel like her character is both squandered and excellent, because during her speech where she comes out in the hospital after she ran away from school, I think it was a hospital. I think it's just a doctor's office.
Yeah, she had that car accident.
That's a scene where we see that the Cheneys aren't stepping in line with Republican values. They don't care if the daughter's gay. They care more about their daughter than they do about the sexuality. Very clearly, they're beating the Republican drum just as a charade. They don't care what party they've been on. Right. Cheney's never cared about his party.
No, which... in some way, I'm glad they made this movie, because it does really show how unique he is. Because if you remember the opening quote in the movie, he is a very quiet man, a very observant individual, in contrast to the usual rambunctious, if not bombastic, Republicans we see on TV every day.
Right, but bringing the conversation back to his daughter, going back to talking about Mary for a moment, I feel like she's also squandered, because at the end of the movie, Dick finally betrays the person closest to him in order to help his daughter gain a small amount of power in the Senate seat. It's a completely pointless backstab, and there's no reason for him to do it, but it shows a great deal of his character if they had done it right. Instead, it's played very melodramatically. It's done through a montage. It's like the heart thing, the teacups falling. It's all way over the top.
It is, yeah.
And I think that there could have been an excellent use of her to portray simultaneously what Cheney has become through the vice presidency and his abuse of power and his putting the power above anything else in his life, and the ways that he's destroyed his family and his family life by doing this.
Right. Going to the montages real quickly, so I do see the point of the montages, because, they do take a lot of newsreels from stuff that actually happened to help reinforce the... You think they were overdone? Do you think there were too many montages?
I think, by and large, you could have gone without the montages, straight up.
By and large, okay, without the montages. Okay.
I think for the most part the montages got in the way, because they were either the, as I said before, the doom and gloom, ultra melancholy reminder montages, so that the dumb audience doesn't forget that this guy's a bad guy, or it was the way over the top too artsy montages with the hearts, where it was done with like a very clear symbolic meaning that I just didn't care about. I think if we want to get into some suggestions a little bit and thoughts about what could be done in the future for this movie, if somehow the writer and director is listening, which I doubt.
Right.
But if he is, or if someone's inspired by it, I would say the main takeaway for improving this movie: trust your audience. You don't need to go out of your way to show that he's a bad guy, that we shouldn't like him, or anything like that. Trust your audience to have half a clue about the subtext you're putting in, and play the dark comedy straight. But play it straight for the dark comedy. Don't constantly jump between this way too silly tone that comes up in a few places. Don't go way too dark to make sure that we don't fall in love with Dick Cheney, who would.
Right.
Except for Lynn. Just play it straight. That'd be my number one suggestion. Trust your audience.
I am with you there. The audience does want to be taken seriously. They do need to kind of downplay some of the humor. It can be excessive. There is a fine line between playing it straight and then being too silly.
Okay. And the other suggestion I'd have, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, I would cut most of the beginning half hour of the movie. Because I feel like it really dawdles, it goes slow, and we take a long time to get to the promise of the movie, which is called Vice. Remember, it's about the vice presidency. And for the first 45 minutes, an hour, he's not even the vice president. He's not even been approached about the vice presidency.
In some ways, I could kind of see that, but, for it to be a biopic, we do kind of need to know some of his life story, what was his cornerstone to have gotten him into politics to begin with, right?
Oh, sure, but I'm not saying we shouldn't have that stuff. I'm saying that we should trim it down from 45 minutes of the movie to 15 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, we didn't need a montage of him being too rowdy at, bars and casinos or what have you. That's fair.
That part's pretty short. Most of what I'm talking about in the first half hour, 45 minutes, is him working in different government jobs, getting to know Rumsfeld. Mostly him kind of just doing his job a little bit, learning some of the ropes. But I feel like instead of doing it over a half hour like what happened in the movie, this could have been 15 minutes. If we need a montage, put it there.
So the movie was 2 hours? How long of a movie do you think it should have been?
It runs long, and I think that it could have been done shorter. What about you? What would be your number one suggestion to improve the movie?
No, definitely like you said, take the audience seriously. Don't be too silly, and definitely edit some stuff out. We do want to know his life story, but we don't need to know the whole life story, like every excruciating detail.
I actually totally agree with that. Let's change tracks a little bit here. Let's talk about some of the good stuff in the movie. Brennan, start us off.
I do want to talk about, I think the good part of the movie is how thorough the movie was in kind of building up Dick Cheney's character. They started him off as, this Yale dropout, this flunky who pulls himself out of the mud and slowly climbs the ladder, climbs the ascension to power.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that as far as a classic hero's journey tale where we start with our hero at his lowest, despondent, and he manages to rise to glory, I think it really works as a hero's journey story. Oddly enough, for a biopic.
Right. Yeah. No, it really...
It's something of a dark hero story, though, because he does this through a lot of unethical, highly illegal means, by and large.
Right. And this movie does also does a good job of, checking your conscience. In some ways you're rooting for the protagonist, but in other ways, wait a minute, I hate that guy.
Right. But I think that the way that they try and get that done by, having these blunt force montages of that, which we talked to death about, I think it's a little bit blunt, and again, they could have used a lighter touch. I would say for myself that the real shining star of this movie is the performances. Christian Bale is excellent.
Oh my god.
Steve Carell is excellent. Tyler Perry, as a surprising Colin Powell, comes out really well in this movie. And Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney, she is so convincing. I love her in this movie.
Oh, I know. Stephen Carell as Rumsfeld, that one surprised me as well.
His name's Steve Carell.
Steve Carell. What did I say?
Steven.
Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld. That one surprised me.
He's so fun. He is so fun.
He is.
And near the end of the movie, when we see him as an older man, some gray in his hair, getting a phone call from Cheney that he's been let go, he looks fantastic in that. The makeup did amazing with this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced there are a few scenes where they cut to the real Cheney giving an interview or the real Cheney giving a speech, and it's really hard to notice.
It really is. I mean, for the life of me, I couldn't even tell if that was even Christian Bale when I first saw the movie poster. I think it was you that told me that was Christian Bale, and I was still skeptical.
Similarly, Sam Rockwell. I feel like Sam Rockwell got kind of shafted in this movie.
He did.
He got the role of George W. Bush, the president at the time of Cheney's term in office. He gets a good 10-15 minutes of good character where we get these nice one-on-one conversations between Cheney and Bush where he's kind of swindling him out of his power and trying to secure his own power. And then after the election, Bush disappears from the movie.
He was only in it for like 3 scenes. Yeah. It was...
I mean, he's around. He is the president, but he just disappears from the movie. He doesn't matter.
Right.
Now, you could argue the realism angle of, well, yeah, it's the presidency. That's how it went. But I feel like his character was wasted.
It was. I mean...
Him and Colin Powell.
Colin Powell, well, again, Tyler Perry. That one also surprised me. Colin Powell is definitely more of a minor character in contrast to George Bush. I feel like they should have probably emphasized how all kinds of information was just kept going down the chain of command away from Bush,
Speaking of Colin Powell, let's actually take a side path and talk about how he's a side character who also gets one of the emotional high points of the movie. Talking about when he gives his speech and how much time, effort, and attention the movie devotes to talking about Colin Powell's emotional response, how he felt terrible about giving this speech, and how that was the low point of his career, according to him. It's strange. There's about 10 minutes of the movie that's devoted to purely just talking about Colin Powell and his response to this speech, when he doesn't matter for the rest of the movie.
That speech does hit. It really does hit you, because, I mean, it reminds you of what Dick Cheney is doing throughout his whole term, and how atrocious it really is, and how...
So, Colin Powell, I feel like he was a little bit wasted as the one voice in the room that was reasonable. I feel like he was wasted as a character. What are your thoughts?
I think he had the appropriate amount of screen time because, he was that one glimmer of voice of reason that was ultimately drowned out by Rumsfeld and all his other constituents. And
what about Condoleezza Rice?
Oh, God.
She was in the room.
Yeah.
That's all I can say about her.
That's it. Talking about wasted characters.
What a wasted role. You don't even get a speaking line.
Well, she was only in it for like the opening scene, and that's it, right?
No. She showed up during the 9/11 thing. She was at the table. She shows up at a couple of meetings. That's about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You're a member of the cabinet, but you don't get a single speaking line.
Yeah. Scooter Libby, the guy who played Scooter Libby, had more lines in her.
Oh my God, he did. Okay, well, looks like we are wrapping up our conversation. So, the final check: would you or would you not recommend this movie?
I would, because like I said, it's interesting. You go through your whole life reading about this man, but to actually see him in action in a movie, it's kind of it's a refreshing change of pace, really.
All right.
Kind of alters your perspective about him in some ways. Kind of, I don't know. I think ultimately you do want closure. It's like you want to know why Dick Cheney did what he did, and instead of watching the news, you get a movie that kind of helps provide some closure to that curiosity. I feel like.
Yeah, I would also recommend this movie, despite it not being a super strong recommendation, and like has been noted before with other reviewers, it does have a fairly inconsistent tone. It does kind of speak down to its audience a little bit. I would ultimately recommend this film. It's good enough in the places where it's good. It has some solid laughs. It gets from me in a few places.
Has a solid cast.
A very good cast. Excellent acting.
Oh, yeah.
I want to take a moment and note, too, that the acting is fantastic in this movie. Nobody feels miscast. Nobody feels out of place. Even if some characters didn't quite get the screen time they deserved, which I think is because of the bloated first half hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But I feel like every character is very well cast in this movie. Nobody feels wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But I would say I overall do recommend this movie. I'm not going to say go out of your way to see it, but I'm going to say I didn't walk out of the theater like being woeful about my time spent there. I didn't feel like I was robbed of my time. Overall, decent movie.
I agree. That is our take on the movie. Hope you all enjoyed as much as we did.
Now, just a reminder, this podcast is funded by... no one. It's not funded by anyone. Brennan, how are we going to make a living?
I could recycle cans. I drink a lot of beer and soda.
Well, that'll sustain us for now. But we are willing to sell out. We are willing to sell out fast. So if you are a sponsor, get in touch with us. We'll sell out so fast.
Oh, so fast.
For everyone who's not a sponsor, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you taking the time to listen, taking the time to hear our extremely well-informed and definitely purely factual takes on these films.
If that.
This has been Nick.
And this has been Brendan.
All right, have a good night.